FM News Talk 97.1. On-demand audio.
They're on a boat together, and if it sinks, who survives? America!
Again, David Sanchez, the guy who warmed up for Donald Trump at his rally yesterday with another zinger there. If Hillary Clinton and Bernie Sanders are on a boat and it sinks, who wins? Sorry, were we there? Okay. Oh, I thought I'd lost my voice for a minute. Frightened me.
That was totally me.
Glad you're back with us on the Marc Cox Show. Just a few minutes, we're going to talk to Bill Brandis about this threat, this EMP threat. I mean, there have been a variety of reports on this and over the years, and just how real is the threat here in the St. Louis area and really to the country, and how seriously is it being taken? We're going to talk about that coming up in just a couple of minutes. On the transgender bathroom issue. So my son works at a area ballpark, is one of his jobs, and he was down there last night, and he was taking a little break, and he was standing outside the back door, which is not too far from the bathrooms, and he says he's looking at his phone, as kids are prone to do, and he looks up, and there's a guy standing in front of him, and the guy's looking at one bathroom door, and he's looking at the other bathroom door, and he says to my son, I just haven't made my mind up yet which bathroom I want to go into today, which just cracked my son up because he listens to the show, and he's obviously familiar with the issue. Mm-hmm. And then he finds out that this guy, whose name is Jerry, is a big listener to our show. So I just want to say, Jerry, if you're listening, my son got a huge kick out of that last night, and clearly people are keeping a sense of humor about this whole thing.
And which bathroom did he finally decide on?
He went to the men's room, from what I can tell. That's exactly what he did. Down in Texas, they had a school board meeting last night, and where, guess what came up at the school board meeting? And this is happening at school board meetings across the country. Coming soon to a school board near you, when they're forced to accept these rules being pushed down their throat by the Department of Justice and the Department of Education. Parents are going to stand up and say no. And what does it all get down to? Remember what the Lieutenant Governor of Texas said? Maybe it's time to start looking at vouchers. Maybe it's time to allow parents to have the option to send their kids to a private school so that the federal government can't come in and blackmail the school district into instituting this policy that they disagree with. And, of course, people have latched on to that because some want to one parent down there took the conspiracy route that's really what this is all about, is about diverting public money to private schools. Are you kidding me? We didn't start this fight. Of course, I'd love to see vouchers for private schools, but we didn't start this fight. By the way, that's going to be an issue we're going to talk about tomorrow, because there's going to be a statewide vote that supposedly deals with raising the tobacco tax to fund early childhood education. Is that really what it's about? That's coming up tomorrow here on the Marc Cox Show. Right now, I want to talk to my friend Bill Brandis, who's been kind enough to give us a few minutes of his time. Bill, how are you?
Well, good afternoon, Mark. How are you doing?
Hey, I'm doing great. Just to give people some background, Bill was the fire chief over in Creve Coeur. And you've been involved in first responder issues in this area for many, many years. And you're still running things out at Hidden Valley, right?
I'm still the general manager out at Hidden Valley. And, yes, I was also the St. Louis County Hazmat WMD commander.
Okay.
Well, the mass destruction commander for over 18 years for St. Louis County.
So So, given that background, you dealt with the issue of what would happen if an electromagnetic pulse bomb went off over the United States. So, probably where we should start for my listeners who may or may not be familiar with what that even is, kind of give people an idea of what we're talking about here.
Okay, Mark. Well, basically, electromagnetic pulse. First of all, this can be a superset of waves that can hit over certain areas of the Earth, and usually we can really take familiar with the solar spots and the solar storms that occur on our sun. That can be a natural occurring EMP. However, there are other ways of creating an EMP. One such way would also be what's called an HEMP, a high altitude electromagnetic pulse. So you got to remember we have the capability of having a EMP affect our area, as well as from the sun, as well as from a possible event by somebody that's out to harm us.
Sure.
There's also other ways, Mark. There's cybersecurity that can affect our electrical grid, and that's the thing that an EMP attack would do, is it affects the electrical grid, and basically we'd be left in the dark. I'm sure you're familiar with Ted Koppel, and your listeners are. Ted had a book out this past year called Lights Out. I really recommend people to read about it. With an EMP, it can occur naturally, like I said, from a solar storm. It can occur from a high EMP, a high altitude attack in Russia, Iran, Korea, nations that's not always familiar, or not always not familiar, but not always favorable to us. They have that capabilities to do that, and that's the concern. It also, an EMP can also, like I said, be a cyber attack on the electrical grid, taking down the lights.
But part of what you're talking about with the risk of an EMP would be this nut in North Korea managing to set off a nuclear weapon low enough in the atmosphere that it effectively would destroy our electrical grid. And if you drive everything that we have in the United States now has a chip in it that is going to be fried the moment that happens.
That's right. The microprocessors that are used in almost everything we do, our cell phones, our computers, our cars, the security systems at very large electrical plants, all those things have microprocessors. A lot of your appliances have them now. I mean, it's unbelievable. And yes, that could cause them to fry and be inoperable.
And there's a great book about this. Now, it's a book of fiction, but the foreword is written by Newt Gingrich, and it's called 1 Second After by William Fortune. I highly recommend people grab a copy of this and read it.
Absolutely.
It's a great book. And what it drives home to you is, in the event that this happens, a couple of things happen pretty quickly. Survival instincts kick in. Individual communities are no longer interconnected. They're not connected by the highway system because all of the cars that were on the highway quit running and people had to abandon them. You don't have electricity. It affects medical care. People who are kept alive falsely by medicine, who can't get it anymore, perish. And I mean, the casualties mount pretty quickly.
You know, there's some reports that would show that if we had an EMP attack or even a solar storm that created a natural EMP, in which they have occurred in the past, just so everybody knows that's important to make. We know the Carrington event, which occurred in the United States in the middle 1850s, or late 1850s, 1859, I believe. But what you said is exactly correct, Mark. your food, your fuel, your medications, your life support equipment, your lights, your sewer, your water, all that will instantaneously come to a stop. And that is not good. I mean, it's hard to, people panic now when the internet's down for 9 minutes, or if the lights are out for more than 24 hours, you know what happens. And we're talking 2 to 4 years to recover from a significant event that could affect us.
And that's what I want to talk about next, is how prepared we are, or what this country would have to do to prepare. But the book I referred to is set in the hills of North Carolina, just outside of Asheville, North Carolina. They don't have severe winter there. If something like this happened in the dead of winter, I can remember when there have been ice storms and people have been without power for 3, 4, 5 days. I mean, and that's a life-threatening event in some cases. We're talking about years being without power.
We are talking about years. Again, whether it could be, a natural event like a solar flare that resulted in electromagnetic pulse, or it could be, one of our enemies wishing to do us harm. Another thing, and your book that you just referenced 1 second after, I encourage everybody to read that book and then to look at the one Lights Out by Ted Koppel. Mark, there's an excellent website, too, that our viewers, listeners can turn to, and that is securethegrid.com. And that's been my guiding source for the last few years on this when I got actively involved in trying to alert my fellow Americans, hey, we got a problem. The federal government, in my opinion, has failed us miserably on this. And, it's up to the individuals to try and prepare for such an event.
Speaking of preparing, I know that Ronald Reagan started an effort to harden the U.S. military against an attack like this. And before very many years, the funding for that went away. Yeah. So do you know, is there an active effort on the part of the federal government, or has there been recently, to protect even U.S. military equipment from an attack like this?
There has been a little bit. In fact, rather interesting is in the past few years, up until just this last early spring, the Cheyenne Mountain, which located in Colorado, near the Air Force Base there and near the Air Force Academy, they have been reactivated. So there is money pouring in to reactivate that. I'm also aware that there's I believe it's called the SPIDER program. There's another acronym. I just don't recall the words to it right now. But they're trying to reinforce and help protect the military bases on the continental U.S. at the time. So
wow.
I do know those two things are going on. That helps the military, obviously, but it doesn't help the individual.
And I want to spend a few minutes talking about how this might impact the St. Louis region. Can you hold on, because I need to go to a break real quick?
Sure.
Yep. Okay. Hold on just a minute. Let me put Bill on hold. That is Bill Brandis, who's with us. Bill is a former fire chief in Creve Coeur. He's been very active in hazmat operations locally, and he can address really what might happen here in the St. Louis area in the event that our electric grid goes down. And how prepared are you? Have you listened to any of the commercials? Do you have any meals ready to eat in your basement? Do you have any water set aside? Do you have any of that stuff, which would also come in handy if there was an earthquake? We're going to talk about that coming up and much more. 314-969-9797. We'll get to your phone calls as well right after this. You might say that. Thank you, President Obama. We appreciate that. In 2001, there was a commission to assess the threat to the United States from an electromagnetic pulse attack. The conclusion they drew is that there was a threat from all potentially hostile states or non-state actors who could acquire nuclear weapons and ballistic missiles, enabling them to perform a high-altitude EMP attack against the United States within the next 15 years. Now, I'm not a math genius, but this was 2001, and today is 2016. That's 15 years. That's what they were worried about. Think about this. Are you diabetic? Do you use insulin? Insulin has to be refrigerated. Do you know that your local grocery store has maybe 4 or 5 days worth of supplies and they get refreshed all the time by truck? So after the run on the grocery stores, where do you get your food? Maybe if you live in a rural area where you can grow stuff, but if it's the dead of winter, what do you do? These are all questions that people haven't really thought about. Our guest is Bill Brandis, a former Creve Corps fire chief, and he's headed up the area hazmat groups for a long time. And Bill, I certainly appreciate your time. How prepared are we in St. Louis?
Honestly, we're not. There are individuals I'm aware of, Mark, that are prepared. I can tell you a little bit what I have done with my family, and I know several others that have done the same. That as far as the government, whether it be at the local, state, or even federal level, we're very unprepared for this. And you brought up the commission that met, and they even met as late as 2004, 2008, and still nothing has really been accomplished. And other than bringing some key people to the table to address the issues with the potential of the electrical grid going down or being destroyed, there's very little that has been done. And that's a shame. We can prepare for this, and preparing for it, you're also preparing for other storms or disasters that could come your way.
Right.
So that's a key. Is we're going to be on our own, basically.
Well, it's in the preparation side of it is intimidating, and you've got the group of people out there who want to thumb their nose at you and say, "Oh, you're a prepper. You think all this bad stuff's going to happen. I'm not worried about that." And you may not have to build a bomb shelter in your backyard, but people just don't grasp the threat from this, whether it's man-made or not. And the length of time they're going to be required to feed and provide for their family with zero electricity.
Exactly. And zero fuel and zero capability of cleansing your sewage, zero capability of cleansing your water, no access to medications. It just goes on and on. And, there are things we can do to help close the gap. But keep in mind, Mark, and your listeners, that this is something that can occur naturally, as well as from a cybersecurity issue,
sure,
as well as from a high electromagnetic pulse, and that would be a high-altitude electromagnetic pulse, such as a satellite from one of the rogue nations or those that don't necessarily agree with our way of life here. It can also become just a few people targeting the electrical system and taking out what we call the ultra-high voltage transformers or extra high voltage transformers that help work the three grids in the United States.
Right.
It would not take very many people with the right technique, which is very simple, to take out those transformers, and we would be in the dark for years. 2 to 4 years is not out of the question.
Yeah, I don't know if you want to tell this story or not, so I'll give you the option to beg off if you don't. But one example is if you have a car that was built after what, the 1960s maybe? There's a very good chance it won't start?
Well, most of the cars that have the EFI, the electronic fuel injection, those cars would not be operable for the most part unless somebody took extra shielding protection with those. And that's a whole new story there. But most of the cars that are on the road today, and I say cars, I should say vehicles, trucks, motorcycles, everything that has the microprocessor or an EFI carburation system in it, those are fuel system, not carburation, but fuel. Those will not run. There's a very good chance they'll be dead in the highway, just like you mentioned, Mark. And how are you going to get from point A to point B, especially when you're out of food, you're out of water, your toilets are backing up? What are you going to do? Have you thought about it?
Yeah, it's a good question. You went out and bought a car, didn't you, specifically just in case that happened?
Mark, being from the fire and EMS and hazmat service for 39 years, 5 of that as a young volunteer with Chesterfield Fire Department, and the remainder of that, almost 34 years from private to chief at Creve Coeur Fire District.
Right.
I can tell you I always prepared my family for the worst. I can tell you my family, we are prepared for about 2.5 years of our food supply. Most of our medications are covered there that my wife and I take. I can tell you that last year I was assessing our emergency preparations, and I realized that the shortcoming I had was one that I was talking about, is having a vehicle that would run, or that would still run after an EMP, whether it be, a geomagnetic storm or solar storm or a high EMP attack on us. And I went out and I did purchase a vehicle. I ended up with a Toyota Land Cruiser, and it's made in the 70s, and it's a diesel.
Oh, okay.
So I would still have a vehicle that would run. I have done a few modifications to that vehicle. I can tell you that it's not inexpensive to find one like that. My wife thought I was crazy at first when I said we're probably looking at a $50,000 vehicle that we need. And we do have that now, and I feel I sleep a lot better at night. Well,
I sleep a lot better because I'm going to Bill's house if anything happens. hang on. Let me get to a phone call or two real quick here. What did I do? I think I just hung up on Bill. Can you ask them to call him back? Rick, you're on the air.
Yeah, Mark, I enjoy this program here.
Thank you.
I got couple things on the EMP bombs. One thing, it's a perfect weapon. Within 6 months, the United States will lose 65% of their population. The strong will survive.
Wow.
The food storage that our federal government's got will not be for citizens. They'll be for the military and the strong to survive. Also, this is only in the news for a short period of time. I think it's about 3 months after the Malaysian jet disappeared. There was 11 planes on Libya's airport, commercial planes, that also disappeared. I thought it was going to be big news, but it was on the news for half a day, and that was it.
I reported that it happened, but I never heard a resolution to it. They never did find them?
As far as I know, they never did find them.
Wow.
And now the Malaysian jet was considered piggyback, and when it disappeared, it piggybacked, they claim. So now if you can piggyback away from radar, you can sure piggyback in radar.
Mm-hmm.
So we have the big threat there also we have to think about. And being prepared, you get to think about, it's going to be tough. It's really going to be tough. I've been preparing for about 8 years now, and I'm telling you what, I'm not even close to it.
Wow.
There's so much, you got to find a place to go to. You got to get away from the population. Even if we're getting away from the population, you still got survival.
Yeah, that's a good point. And
it's going to be bad.
Rick, I appreciate your phone call, and I as I mentioned there, I accidentally hung up on Bill when I took that Rick's phone call. He was talking about the fact that he's been working on preparation for a number of years, Bill, and he still doesn't feel like he's completely ready to go.
I fully understand. It's a work in progress. We do the same, my family and I. And I thought we had an EMP attack there on our cell phone, so I'm glad you just accidentally hit the button. So that would show how phones would quit. I mean, without notice, your cars would stall, your lights would go out. You know, it is a work in progress. I believe the caller's name was Rick. Is that correct?
Correct. Yeah.
Well, you know, he's exactly right. If he's been working on it years, he's not alone. And but you know, you gave a good resource, that book, 1 Second After, and that's a great book to read. Also, I'd recommend Lights Out by Ted Koppel. And there's another one, and this is a real simple one, and I don't remember the author's name, but if you look it up on the internet, Darkest Days on How to Survive an EMP Attack to the Grid is one of the easiest books, I would say, for the common lay person. I agree with 90% of the material in there.
Okay.
It actually helps the fellow Americans learn how to prepare, what you need to have to prepare, and how you can carry it on for several months, if not years, on your own.
Bill Brandis, listen, I appreciate your willingness to spend 20 minutes with us today to talk about this important issue.
Mark, anytime, and to my fellow Americans and countrymen out there, don't always depend on your local, state, and federal governments. They only can do so much, and in this case, if this would or when it ever happens, it's going to be a real cluster, and you're going to have to be ready to fend for yourself for quite a while.
Bill, I look forward to talking to you again soon.
Thank you, Mark. Anytime. Yep. You guys have a wonderful Memorial Day week, and everybody be safe.
You too. Thank you. Bill Brandis there. Appreciate him giving us some time today. David, Russ, I will get to your phone calls. If you have a comment on this or a question, 314-969-9797. We will be back here with more of the Marc Cox Show in just a minute.
So strange.